Hey guys, what's up? It's Alex from the And1 podcast. Just letting you know you can subscribe on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, wherever it is you listen to your podcast. Make sure to follow the podcast at And1 Analytics on Twitter. Follow me at AlexWestNBA. Today I have Patrick Oxford and Will Walker, both from the 94 Feet Report draft team, and we're going to talk about the first round matchups that we're really interested in. We get into the Sweet 16 and a couple others, but we're looking at these NBA prospects as they play their what might be their final games in the NCAA tournament. So, Brent, take us away. So I'm joined today by my guests, Patrick Oxford and Will Walker. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing great today. I'm waiting for the rise of the new Houston dynasty. Phi shoot a jumper.
Okay.
I'm doing wonderful also.
Awesome. Glad to have both of you. So we're going to talk a little bit about the opening two rounds of the NCAA tournament. Both of you guys are draft analysts for the 94 Feet Report. We all work pretty closely together, and we've got our mock 3.0 came out a couple weeks ago, so we have some pretty decent familiarity with this draft class and the big players. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
I mean, I can't speak for myself, but y'all are good.
All right, so Will, I'm gonna start with you. Will, what are your opening round matchups that you're looking at and you really feel excited about to watch from an NBA draft perspective? Are there players out there that you're really excited to see right now?
Well, shoot, it's that time of year. I'm excited to see everything. I want to see how Trae Young looks against some better competition, hopefully, if he can get past his first round matchup. I'm trying to pull up the field right now.
Yeah, that Oklahoma Rhode Island matchup is going to be a little bit shaky for the Sooners, who backed their way into the tournament. But that's a player that I feel like has a lot of opportunity for growth. And Patrick and I talked about this a little bit in pre-show. I mean, Patrick, do you think that Trae Young is the guy in the field who can grow the most with some big wins, maybe one or two, or even a win against Rhode Island in a big game against Duke?
Yeah, I think it depends on really whose big board / mock draft you're looking at. I mean, on mine, my big board, he's number 4, so there's not really a ton of room for improvement on mine. But for the people who have him, say 9 on their mock drafts, I mean, I don't know why you would, but if you did, yeah, you could definitely move him up after this, probably, if he had big performances.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have there are certain types of players, and Steph Curry, a decade ago, it feels weird to say that it was a decade ago, but Steph Curry was the type of player that he wasn't particularly heralded until he had a few big tournament appearances, and then that resume started to grow, and obviously we know what he's turned into, and that's by no account meaning Trae Young is the next Steph Curry. But you get these players, particularly point guards who handle the ball a lot, who can shoot very well, and they tend to make a splash in these big events. So if he can go off for 25 today and then another 28 or 30 tomorrow on Saturday against Duke, that would be a huge boon for him in a time where I feel like he's swooned a little bit. I mean, Will, what are your thoughts on Trae Young and how he's being perceived at the moment?
I think he is slipping. There are some reports that some NBA scouts don't even consider him top 10 at this point, which I think is a little rash overreaction to the other side. It just as if some people were thinking he was number 1 after his hot start was a little overreaction. I'm looking forward to see how he matches up against the multiple Rhode Island guards. They can throw so many looks at him with Jared Terrell, Stanford Robinson, and, of course, E.C. Matthews. If he gets past that, though, he may feast on that Duke zone. You just never know.
Yeah, now that's a totally different conversation that I feel like we should have at some point. But I don't understand why Duke plays zone, and it absolutely cost them the game against Carolina. But I would be hard-pressed to imagine that they would stick to that with a player like Trae Young, who is absolutely 100% a zone buster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they should just sick Trayvon Duval on him and just try to make him pay.
Exactly.
That's many up see.
Exactly. All right, so let's flip up into the top part of the bracket, that the East region. Alabama is playing against Virginia Tech. Now, Virginia Tech has a pretty good myriad of wing defenders as well to go against Alabama's Colin Sexton. There might not be a hotter player in the country than Colin Sexton, who helped his team play their way in off the bubble with a nice SEC tournament run. Patrick, is there a big path for Sexton?
Yeah, I think Sexton has not as much ability to improve because the shooting isn't as likely to be something that he can just go to and catch fire on, as opposed to just slashing and getting to the rim. And another player in that first round matchup to keep an eye on who could maybe get himself back into the first round territory is Nickeil Alexander-Walker, long arm defender. Not sure if he'll get time guarding Sexton, but if he does, that's a matchup that he could definitely leverage into more money come draft time.
And that's a player that we were higher on a couple months ago than we are now. I know he was higher in 1.0. I mean, in fact, he was in it in 1.0, and then he sort of dipped off. So it would be interesting to see how Alexander Walker, a player who has that 3-and-D capability at the next level, can contain Sexton. And for him, that would be a huge responsibility, but it would be a huge payoff as well.
Yeah, I think the reason he's dropped off a little bit is his shooting has come down a little bit. He never had the NBA range, if I recall correctly. I think I had a shooting chart on him in the first mock draft. Shooting chart courtesy of Will Schriefer, by the way. Awesome at the Stepien. Check those out. And anyways, he never really had that NBA range, and he didn't do a good job maintaining the efficiency. And whenever you don't have either of those, it's hard to maintain that positioning, even with the ridiculous wingspan he has.
Yeah, most definitely. In that top East region, there's a couple other games that I'm keeping my eye on, and one of them is Arkansas and Butler. And Arkansas is a senior-laden team, but their one freshman, Daniel Gafford, seems to have grown up into one of the best rim runners in the NCAA this year. Will, what are your thoughts on Gafford and his ability to sort of transcend his draft stock at the moment?
I believe he could make of course, it's always, they say it's easier for guards in the NCAA tournament because someone's got to get the big man the ball. But the way he plays and plays so hard, he goes and gets it himself, whether it be through blocks, just running rim to rim, getting rebounds. The effort is something that I really like to see out of someone like him. Comes from tiny El Dorado, Arkansas, around here. And, big fan of his. Big fan of his effort and his little bit of athleticism, mobility. Stronger than he looks at the 225. I think Gafford's going to shoot up the boards. I say top 20. It's not shoot up. I don't think he'll be in the lottery or anything, but top 20 possibly.
I also think that's the perfect position for him to land on a team that already has a decent amount of talent around him, to let him contribute slowly and sort of learn his way, because he is a fantastic energy guy. And that's a player that I'm really keeping my eye on. Who else are you keeping your eye on, Will, right now?
As far as that matchup goes with Butler or the whole region?
The whole East region. Anything you got there that's particularly enticing?
Man, I'm a Jalen Adams stan. I have to admit. I know he's a senior. I know he's small. The kid can just play basketball. I'm not sure if I'm sure he'll not be a starter in the NBA, but he could be a guy that could give you, 12 to 15 minutes off the bench, second unit offense. Just a player, a real hustler, and he struggled in the play-in game. Didn't make me look so good, but I think that's actually one of my upsets. I believe the Bonnies will upset Florida, and you heard it here first.
There you go. I think he played really well down the stretch, sort of late in that game. Early on, obviously, he had his shaky start, but I feel like closing that game out for about the last 3 or 4 minutes, he came on and showed what it means to be a senior. And I think if Jalen Adams gets drafted, that's where he's going to contribute. He's a guy who is patient, who is calm, who is composed, who knows how to run an offense. And, we were just talking about this in our Slack yesterday, how there is a place for that backup point guard who can do those kind of things. And I really like Jalen Adams. And in that same bracket, I also like West Virginia's Javon Carter for the same reason. Carter might be the best guard defender in this draft. I mean, he's a little bit on the small side, but he is a absolute bulldog. Patrick, do you think that there's a space for guys like Jalen Adams, for guys like Javon Carter?
Yeah, specifically looking at Javon Carter, I mean, I can specifically attest to Patrick Beverley working here in Houston, it's all about fit for players like that. They got to find teams with playmakers on the wings and work to make those rosters. They can't be satisfied with any opportunity because, you get an opportunity and you don't look good in that. That means you may have lost a future opportunity that maybe you could have had if you been more selective about where you went. So it'll be interesting to see how players like Javon Carter choose their destination if they do not get drafted. Obviously, if you get drafted, there's no choice in the matter. But I think he could be at the range where he doesn't get drafted, or he could be in that high 40 or low 40s. That's probably where I have him. I've seen him at a little bit higher, but I'm a little bit worried about his jumper. His 3-point shot fell off a little bit in conference play, so I want to see if he can have a big tournament, because he's a guy that could probably catch fire more easily than Sexton from deep, I believe.
Yeah.
So if he had a big tournament, he could definitely push himself into the first round on my board, as he already is on others.
Yeah, I definitely think in that same situation, I totally spaced on this guy, but Landry Shamet from Wichita State is another guy who fits that same mold as an older point guard, very patient, definitely has the ability to contribute at the next level. Now, we skipped over the Midwest region a little bit. I want to circle back to it real quick and just talk about the games that you're excited about in that region, because to me, it has the most exciting potential matchup, but we're a week away from it, and that's Michigan State and Duke. But in that bracket, you've got Kansas, you've got Duke, you've got Michigan State, and then you've even got some peripheral guys who might be able to make a splash. What matchups are you looking at down there, Will, that you really like in that Midwest region besides the Oklahoma-Rhode Island matchup?
Potentially, I'd like to see TCU, Kenrich Williams. I'd like to see him show up big. I'm not sure they can get past Michigan State, but I'd like to see the matchup there. I would have loved to seen Anthony McLemore play, but I believe with that ankle, it's pretty much done for him. And there's some matchups there. Like I said, I'd like to see Oklahoma actually get past Rhode Island, as much as I do like their guards, and I'd like to see him go up against Duke. That would be really quality basketball entertainment right there.
It's not a particularly interesting region in the first 2 weeks, but then once you get into the later parts of the bracket in the Elite Eight, you could have the winner of Duke and Michigan State playing Kansas. Like, there's a lot of potential in that bracket for good matchups, but it's a couple of weeks down the road. Patrick, is there anybody on Kansas that's worth watching? I mean, Devontae Graham, we were talking about point guards who are older, and you got Gerald Vick, who's a fantastic athlete, but we're not sure sort of what else he is. Is anybody on Kansas really worth zeroing in on when it comes to NBA draft stock?
What is Azubuike's injury status? Do you know that? I think he's someone I thought was maybe interesting down the line. But if he's not going, I think you nailed it with Devontae Graham and LaGerald Vick as their two main guys to watch.
He is a game time decision as of now, and Bill Self said he could play in an emergency type situation. Now, I don't know if that means if there's a fire in the stadium or what the situation would be where it would require him to play, but he seems to be available, but I say that with air quotes. So, but do you think that's a player that Udoka Azubuike is a player that would could make a contribution at the next level?
Potentially. There's some tools there. I don't know that I've watched him enough to say for sure I'm confident on the defense, which is obviously the most important part of a big. But I definitely have seen the tools there and what I've seen. So it's just a matter of, the important parts, the mental things. And then circling back to that TCU Syracuse matchup, Kenrich Williams, of course, is a great guy to watch. Tyus Battle is a guy I think that could still work himself into second round positioning. I don't personally have him there, but people overvalue tournament play, and if he has a big game against TCU, and then they probably won't beat Michigan State even if they were to beat TCU, obviously, but a big game against Michigan State after that and a loss, he could definitely move himself up some boards.
All right, let's talk about just very briefly here, let's talk about a potential Michigan State Duke matchup. Now you have Wendell Carter, you got Marvin Bagley for the Blue Devils, and then for the Spartans, you have Miles Bridges and Jaren Jackson. These are players, that's 4 of likely top 10. I mean, who has the most to prove to you, Will, in a game like that, if that happens in the Sweet 16?
I feel like with the public, it seems like maybe Jaren Jackson Jr. because the advanced stats really love him. He fouls a lot, so he doesn't get a whole lot of action as much as you would like. Everybody knows about Marvin Bagley. Coming from the Drew League and the highlights we've seen there, we know he can play against real men. His role on the next level is going to be interesting. But this matchup right here will be going against, a potential, NBA players. Jaren Jackson. I'd like to see Bridges kind of get down there in the mix, although he may be stuck on Trent. And, of course, Patrick's about to talk to you about Cassius Winston. There's a lot of players in here that could go in the first round. You're talking about Trent. You're talking about Duval was a potential lottery pick. Who knows about Grayson Allen? He might trip somebody. So there's always that to look out for.
The thing that bothers me about this matchup the most is the fact that Nick Ward exists. Nick Ward is just standing in the way of the thing that I want to see, and that's Miles Bridges playing more of the 4. Patrick, who are you looking at in that potential game?
Will paid me correctly with the Cassius Winston. No, but in terms of matchups, I think it's going to be a big game for Jaren Jackson. But also, Marvin Bagley missed that first matchup, and he is the common household name, obviously, in this matchup. He does have something to prove here, I think, just for the fact that he missed big portion, pretty much the whole thing. So.
Yeah, I'm very high on Bagley, and this is something we'll get into a little bit later, not in the podcast, just a little bit later in the year as we get closer to the draft. I think he's the 3rd best player in the draft, and I'm sure we're going to argue endlessly about that, but I definitely think going up against Jaren Jackson, however they choose to utilize Jackson on the defensive end, will be a big test for him because scoring its length has not been his strong point, but he is a player that brings a tremendous, tremendous amount of upside to the table. All right. Let's change gears and go over to the West. I'm trying to hit all 4 of these brackets in a small amount of time. In the West, you've got obviously the marquee player being Michael Porter Jr. for the 8-seed Missouri Tigers. But you've also got some other players. You've got Killian Tilly. You've got Rui Hachimura. You've got, I guess Moritz Wagner is a player who could potentially play himself into some money if he shows up. And then you've got Theo Pinson. Who are you looking at in that West bracket that can maybe contribute at the next level?
I would be looking, like you said, Moritz Wagner is a guy that could really move himself up into maybe the early second round with a huge performance, maybe with a merely good performance end of the second round. Jonte Porter, I think, could move himself up boards. He's been moving up our mock draft pretty steadily, and
with good reason, by the way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's very impressive. His finishing around the rim needs some work, but he's very young, so I don't think it's too big of a red flag at this point. If he was a year older, maybe you'd start to get worried about the finishing, but with his passing, his ability to create from the perimeter and from the post for other players, I think he's a player that's going to both be fun for people to experience, maybe for the first time this tournament and into the future.
Well, Will, who do you like in the West, just in terms of a player who can play themselves up the draft board a little bit?
I think Keita Bates Diop will play himself into more of a household name. Hopefully he'll get one win. Probably that's it. I've got Gonzaga going to the Final Four, so you can tell I love Killian Tilly. I love Rui Hachimura. They've got Williams. They've got a great coach. That's a team that I think is probably going to surprise some people. Robert Williams. Not a big fan of Robert Williams. I believe he's this year's Ivan Rabb, as far as maybe he should have come out last year and just gone ahead and cashed in. I just don't see it. I don't see what the fascination was, and he needs to have a pretty good tournament run. I mean, I have him losing to Providence, but we'll see how he plays.
Now, you touched on 4 forwards there who have a lot of potential. Three of the big ones. For me, one of the problems with Robert Williams is I feel like he's a center playing power forward, and that's a problem with his spacing. I think he is one of those rare guys that will thrive better in an NBA system than he does in the NCAA. So I could see him falling a little bit because he hasn't played particularly well, but to me, that's a system thing. And then you talked about the two forwards for Gonzaga you wrote about this week in our draft Q&A. Killian Tilly and Rui Hachimura both have potential in sort of different ways to make an impact at the next level. How high do you think either one of those guys can go, Will?
I believe the plan is for Hachimura to come back to school. That's what the word on the street is.
Okay.
I would like to see him come on out, of course, in a selfish way to see what he would look like. He's developed a lot this year. He still needs to develop shooting off the dribble, but stand still, not too bad. Now, Killian Tilly, on the other hand, has been on fire from three. I mean, 50% from the season, and I believe he's been almost otherworldly in the past couple of weeks. He is good defensively. He moves his feet well. He's not very big. He's not very thick, but eventually, as he develops and as he grows, wideness-wise, he probably should be able to handle a little bit of small ball five. I see him mostly as a four at the next level. But, yeah, Tilly's the one. And, of course, back to Bates-Diop, the long arms. And the shot just had abandoned him early in his career, and it looks like it's back. So you got somebody like that can defend threes and fours, really get after it, has a little bit of a shot. I mean, that's another player that's, in my book, most likely top 20, top 25.
Yeah, I really like Keita Bates-Diop. He's a player who, obviously has grown every year he's been at Ohio State, and he seems to have played himself into a mid-first rounder. Now, I know that we as a collective are a little bit higher, the three of us, and then Eustaquio Raleigh, our other partner in crime, are a little bit higher on Keita Bates-Diop than it seems to be nationally. But like you said, Will, there are tons of tools there for a player, particularly at the next level. I mean, he can do a little bit of everything, and I will be interested to see what he can do in the tournament. They don't have a particularly enticing matchup against South Dakota State, but then to play Gonzaga in the next round, if he's a player who performs well, I could definitely see him getting a little bit of national notice when it comes to these mock drafts. Now, I want to talk about Carolina Tar Heels for a second because a lot like Kansas, they're a blue blood program who does not have a marquee NBA talent at the moment. They've got Joel Berry, they've got Luke May, they've got Theo Pinson, three guys who are absolutely quality college basketball players. But Patrick, do you see any contribution for any of these guys? I mean, Pinson feels like he can't shoot a lick, but he does a lot of things on a defensive end. Luke May's probably a little bit too short. Joel Berry's probably a little bit too slow. But is there a place for any of these three guys on an NBA roster or even on a G League or a Summer League roster?
I'm probably going to get roasted by Tar Heel Nation for saying this, but I don't think so. Theo was a huge prospect coming out of high school, but the injuries have just kind of derailed his career, sadly. Maybe he gets a G League look just because some team says, hey, we can fix his form or something and we can make him a shooter. I don't know. But other than that, it's hard to tell. Jalik Felton, I think Jalik, whatever, however you say his name, was dismissed from the team, and he definitely disappointed me. I thought he was much better than he was coming into college. So there's a
little bit of undertone rumbling about what happened with Jalik Felton, and I'm sure it'll come out in the next couple of days. But he was a player who did not seem to give his best effort, and I think that was the problem with him.
Yeah, and you definitely know better than I would about his effort level. He was out the door before many people ever had a chance to see him play at all.
Yeah. Yep. I feel kind of bad about the saying that, but I don't feel like you're wrong at all. I mean, the Tar Heels are a little bit lacking in the NBA talent department. And that's just how it's going to be now. A big tournament run might be able to bolster Theo Pinson. And you said it best, that's the name of those three. That's the name that I see having potential to catch on in a Summer League roster. If he plays particularly well, if Carolina makes the Sweet 16, the Final Four, he probably can play his way into a good look. But I really just don't see anybody on this team being a first or even a second round pick. Now let's flip up into this South bracket. There's a lot of interesting matchups, and I saved the best for last because this is a bracket that is absolutely laden with talent. Will, I'm going to let you tackle this one first because I know who Patrick's going to talk about when I ask him who the player to watch in this South bracket is. So, Will, give us a little mystery before we talk about Admiral Schofield.
You caught
Okay.
Me. You caught me, Alex. I'm an Aiden sucker.
Well, of course, I'm going to mention Jacob Evans and Gary Clark with Cincinnati, two borderline first-round picks. Some people don't think Gary Clark's going to be taken in the second round or think it's a possibility he won't be. I think that would be a mistake. The guy's just a player. I would like to see what Lonnie Walker does. Evidently, Loyola Chicago has some guards that can match up with him. That's a popular upset pick. I'm not going that way. I'm picking Miami to win. And I think Lonnie has kind of grown a little bit as the season goes on. Of course, there's Ayton in Arizona. Not as high on him as most people are. And Kentucky, of course, has their future pros. I tell you what, man, it's just a loaded region. I'm sad to see DeAndre Hunter's not going to be there. I'd like to see what Coles Wicker sees in him. And he seems to have risen up draft boards about as fast as Zaire Smith of Texas Tech. Both of those guys kind of came out of nowhere this year. Not nowhere, but very quick risers.
Yeah, I'm very, very high on DeAndre Hunter, like low lottery level high, which is probably too high. But to me, there was a couple of games in the tournament, particularly against Louisville, where he guarded Mahmoud, who was Louisville's 7-footer. And he went from guarding guards, from guarding point guards to guarding 7-footers. And he just showed this kind of versatility. And he's a 39% shooter from three. I was absolutely devastated. I even wrote about it in our Q&A that he was a player who had a lot to gain. And to find out that he broke his wrist and will miss the tournament was an absolutely devastating blow. But this is a bracket that is laden with talent. You have a potential Arizona-Kentucky matchup. I guess it'll be Sunday, right? Yeah. So you got that looming with obviously Kevin Knox, Hammy Diallo, even Jared Vanderbilt. There's a lot of buzz for Kentucky. And then on the other side, you have a player who our own Patrick Oxford wrote about today in DeAndre Ayton, who is either the number one pick or total trash. And I don't know which it is, just, sort of checking up with NBA Draft Twitter.
Yeah, everyone should check out that Aiden article. It's actually Eustachio Raouli's article at EVR 1022, I believe is his
you are correct.
Handle. Yes. So everyone should check that out at the 94 Feet Report. We break down Aiden's defense projections for it, how he covers the pick and roll, recovers, some of his off-ball defense. So definitely check that out. I think Aiden's going to have probably a big tournament, honestly. I think the matchups there for him are matchups he can do well against. Maybe Virginia, I think, is probably going to be the first time that he'll even have an issue scoring the ball.
He is a player who looks like he looks like a middle school kid playing in a fifth grade league. I mean, he's a monster out there. He's enormous. There's just a lot of Ayton. I'm not sure that I love the sort of undertone stories about how committed he is. There are things that I'm not necessarily in love with when it comes to his mentality. But obviously, when you look at him, the skill set is fantastic. Here's a player who, he just dominates games. And you saw that in that Pac-12 championship against USC. He just sort of owned Chimezie Metu. And he is poised for a huge tournament run. Now, let me ask you this, Patrick. Can he play his way into the number one overall pick over Luka Doncic?
I mean, I certainly wouldn't make that pick. I have him third on my my big board right now behind both Doncic and Jaren Jackson Jr. I'd be shocked if I myself moved him over Jaren Jackson Jr. just because I don't think the sample size to disprove what I've seen on his defense so far. There's just not enough games left for me to, be convinced that he's made any notable changes.
Yep.
So getting over Doncic, I just don't think so. Like he's break. I know this was before his shooting slump, but he was breaking more his draft models apparently. And I mean, at that point, that's all I need to know.
Will, what about you? Same question. Do you think that Ayton can play his way into the number one selection with a good tournament run?
Of course he can. Michael Olowokandi did the same thing one time. Not to compare.
All right, I was going to ask you if that was a comparison you were making.
It's a slight comparison. I mean, the mental aspect does scare me. I don't know. He doesn't appear to try as hard as you would want. I mean, there's been players in the past that have done that and been fine. So we'll see.
And he's enormous. I mean, he's 7'2", he's 260. It's a lot different to not try at 7'2" than it is at 6'10". He's So we had some technical issues. The power actually went out in the middle of me talking about DeAndre Ayton. So I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign for DeAndre Ayton's NBA career, but getting ready to wrap things up here. Before we go, I know that both of you guys have some really wild predictions. So I'm going to give you the floor. Will, you want to hit us with that prediction you got for the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, back down in the West bracket, maybe I'm a dreamer and maybe I'm just a Michigan hater, but I believe that Tyler Hall will finally show up and they will beat Michigan in the first round. That's one of my big ones I'm predicting or possibly just hoping for. I'm a big Tyler Hall fan. And, like I said, St. Bonaventure over Florida, that's another one. They're not going to get past Texas Tech, even if they do get past Florida. But I'd love to see Jalen Adams going and beating Florida.
Okay, those are pretty good predictions. I got to hand that to you. Patrick, what about you? I mean, I know yours is pretty out there.
Yeah, I'm going to go way out and say Tennessee is going to make a huge run. Admiral Schofield is going to play himself into the top 20 of the drafts, and they're going to lose to Michigan State in the national championship.
That's a hell of a prediction. I'm going to tell you that.
I know. I had to go way out there for the return of the podcast.
There you go. Well, I was glad to have both you guys on there. Honestly, we're putting a lot of draft coverage out. We had the DeAndre Ayton article today. A lot more stuff coming from all four of us, Eustaquio included, in the next few months as we lead up to the draft. So, guys, I'm sure I'll have both of you on, but again, before too long. Patrick, anything you want to get plugged? What's that?
Who do you have in the final game?
It's going to be super boring when I tell you. I have Virginia and Michigan State. So
I've got Gonzaga and Villanova. So Gonzaga wins it all.
Okay. And what about you, Patrick?
I actually do have Michigan State winning it all, but it's not against Tennessee. It's against Virginia.
That's the same. So we have the same national title. How about that? I also have Michigan State winning. Will, anything you want to get a plug in before you go? I mean, a Twitter handle or anything you want to get on?
At Will Andy Walker NBA.
Boom. Easy. Patrick, what about you, man?
I am at Hoops Metrox, and go ahead and check out the podcast I dropped last night, Stat Nerd Draft Report, with Will Walker right here with us right now, Eustaquio Rowley, and James Blackburn, owner of Power to Win Sports.
Fantastic. I have not gotten to check that out yet. It is on my agenda for today while I watch tournament games. So I will definitely be checking that out, and you guys do that too, because Patrick is doing a great series as we lead up to this. You're going to have a ton of coverage from your 94 Feet Report draft team. So for Will Walker, Patrick Oxford, and Eustaquio Rowley, who's not here with us, but we really appreciate all the clicks you're giving us and all the feedback you're giving us, whether you think it's the worst mock draft you've ever seen or not. So anyway, guys, thanks for coming on. We'll talk to you later, okay?
Thank you.